In today's video, we will be covering every opening principle there is. Let's begin. Principle 1. Develop your pieces. Development literally means to improve, to grow, to progress. Developing your pieces means to get them out to active squares so that all your army can participate in the action. Let me show you an example of how you can develop your pieces. Here is an idea of how all your pieces should be developed. This position is referred to as the dream position. Obviously, you can't always get this position in your games, but this should be the general goal. More on the specific development tips in the upcoming principles. Principle 2. Develop your minor pieces first. Bishops and knights, also known as the minor pieces, are much easier to develop in the initial moves than the heavy pieces, which are queens and rooks. So you should develop your bishops and knights before the other pieces. Principle 3. Develop towards the center. The center is the strategically most important part of the board. From the center, you can play on both the wings of the board. In general, the one who has better center control has the advantage, considering that everything else is equal. To control the center effectively, you need to develop your pieces towards the center, like we had seen in the dream position. So no moving your knight to a3 or h3 and playing bishop to e2. You should play them to active squares, where they can actually play a part. Rule number 4. Try not to move the same piece too many times in the opening. If you understood the 3 rules before this rule should be pretty obvious. Moving the same piece again and again without a valid reason costs time. Time which could have been used to develop your other forces and to coordinate your army towards a higher purpose. Let's look at a small line where black will continuously be moving his knight while white will take advantage of this. E4, knight f6, this is the Alekhine opening. E5, knight e4. This move is a mistake. The normal theory is to play knight d5. Now white can develop his pieces while attacking the stray knight on e4 and maybe even trap it. d3. So as you can see by the arrows I've drawn, this c5 square is the only square for the knight. d4. So notice how white is pushing his pawns up the board and gaining more space, all while attacking the poor knight. Let's say black goes knight e6. We still play d5, knight c5, bishop e3, and here black made a further mistake with knight e4. Obviously something like b6 would have been better when white can play b4, knight b7. It will save the knight, but it won't change the result of the game, as you can see, because that knight on b7 is horrible. It cannot go anywhere, and black has no pieces developed, whereas white has full control of the center, so it should not be hard to predict who's gonna win this game. But in the line that we are seeing, black plays knight e4, and now after bishop d3, f5 is the only move to save the knight, f3, and the knight is trapped. So don't move the same piece over and over again in the opening. Rule number 5. Don't make unnecessary pawn moves in the opening. Just as with moving the same piece too many times, making unnecessary pawn moves in the opening costs time, which could have been used to get your other forces into action. Plus, pawn moves cannot go back, so any weaknesses created by unnecessary pawn moves can be exploited in the long term. For example, in the case of an opposite side castling game, let's see this opening, the Scandinavian defense. This h3 move here is unnecessary. Bishop g4 should not be feared. Now black gets a possibility to attack using the hook created by this weakening move. So in the opposite side castling positions like these, after h6, black has an easier attack than white because he just needs 2 moves to open lines near the white king, whereas white needs to march his a and b pawns all the way in, I don't know, 4 to 5 moves. So it is going to take a long time for white. So if h3 was not played, then the same story could be said for black. But because h3 was an unnecessary pawn move, it creates the weakness. And black can use that weakness to open files quicker than white. Rule number 6. Don't get your queen out too early. The queen is the most powerful and most valuable piece in chess. If you get your queen out too early, then the opponent can develop while attacking your queen. So you will lose time and again fall behind in development. So don't play a queen out too early unless you play the Scandinavian. So let's look at an example of what getting your queen out early can do. So d4 is theory, but queen d4 and queen d5 is a bit of a mistake. The theory goes queen e3. So you are moving your queen away from the attacks. But if white tries to get his queen further and further up the board, then black can make use of this. Again, after knight f6, queen d3, and black only has a slight advantage. Let's say white decides to play queen f5 and keeps moving his queen around the position. Then after d5, which is a discovered attack on the queen, queen f3, d into e4, queen g3, bishop d6, we sack the g pawn. But after rook g8, queen h6, rook g6, queen e3, knight d5, you can't take the e4 pawn because of rook e6, which is a pin. And if you go queen d2, then e3, fe3, knight e3. And black's pieces are extremely harmonious. All of them are pointing towards the white position, whereas white, apart from his queen, has nothing, literally nothing else developed. And obviously white cannot let the knight stay on e3. So if he takes it, then again the pin wins. So don't get your queen out too early. Rule number 7. Prioritize development on the side you will castle. Remember that rule about developing your minor pieces first? This is also a part of it. If you develop your minor pieces first, then you will be able to castle quicker. So let's say you want to castle on the king side. You should develop your g knight and f bishop before every other piece and get castled as quickly as possible. Or at least keep the option of castling in hand. This is because king safety is the most important factor in chess. So your king should be safe by the end of the opening. Obviously, all rules have exceptions. So in openings like the French advance, the center is relatively closed. So letting your king stay in the center for a while is not a bad idea. Rule number 8. Connect your rooks. This rule is more of a checklist, or you can say insurance, to make sure you follow the development rules above. Connecting your rooks would mean that they are protecting each other. So logically speaking, this would mean that you have developed all your minor pieces, castled, and even developed your queen. That's the only way the rooks would be able to protect each other. Rule number 9. Develop with a plan. You shouldn't just put your pieces on random squares for the sake of development. You must also develop a plan. Develop your pieces with an objective. Try to organize your forces and look to maximize their potential. Start thinking about where and why you are getting them out. Some examples of this could be to develop your knights looking to attack pawns, develop your bishop looking to pin knights, develop your rook to open files. The possibilities are endless. The summary is you need to develop with a plan. Rule number 10. Attack in the direction of your pawn chain. Pawn moves cannot be taken back, so they indicate the place where your strengths and weaknesses lie. Thus, you should attack in the direction of your pawn chain, as you would have more space on that side. For example, in the King's Indian defense, which is after d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, black plays d6 with the idea of playing e5 to question white's center and tell him whether he will capture the pawn or push and close the position. White's king is still in the center, so white will decide to castle. And now black will play knight c6, provoking a decision from white, who plays d4. Black has to go knight e7, and now white plays the prophylactic knight e1. Because here, as you will see, black plays knight d7 to prepare f5, white plays bishop e3, f5, f3. So this is why knight e1 was played, to make sure f3 would be possible. f4, bishop f2, and now g5. So in this position, black's pawn chain, as you can see, points towards the king side. So his plan should be to push the g pawn and open files and attack the white king. Things like king h8, h5, knight g6, queen e8, all these things come to mind. Whereas white's plan would be to engineer the break c5 and create permanent weaknesses for black on this side, and maybe even utilize the open lines to get a decisive advantage on that side. So you see both sides play in the direction of their pawn chain. So this is how you're supposed to implement this rule. And this is not only specific to the King's Indian, it can also be applied to openings like the French advance or any other opening where you get such close positions. That's it for today, friends. Please make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making content like this. Till then, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.